Hello and welcome back to this damn fully delisted crusade. This video is going over the first of my probably mini trips to McKay's bookstore after their sort of epic 50th anniversary celebration, where they encouraged people to travel to all of their stores across, pretty much in Tennessee and North Carolina, over a certain period of time within the same day, basically during operating hours. And if you were able to do that or go to more than one store, you got a substantial amount of trade credit, up to over $800 worth. And I've done some videos on things I've found at McKay's locations before, but if you're not familiar with them, they are a regional bookstore chain that specializes in basically all forms of physical media, and also even that extends into musical instruments and AV gear and game consoles. I mean, it runs the gamut, and of course toys as well. But each of the stores is quite a massive location for physical media sales, but also usually has two levels. And they also sell books for absurdly cheap. And usually if I go in there with, say, just $5, I do way too much damage and buy way too many books and other media. And I'm usually able to find all sort of obscure older pressings or things I'm looking for to check the audio when I do comparisons of different video releases of certain films. And all kinds of stuff turns up there that I don't know how it got there. And so I usually refer to it jokingly as the physical media black hole, because you never know what's going to pop up there or how it got there. So normally, because they'll sell books for 25 cents sometimes, or even less than that if it's an older paperback or something in their bargain section, if I go in there with $5 or $10, I buy way too much because I can't help myself. And then I do the classic, what have I done? But letting me loose in there with hundreds of dollars in trade credit and just looking for things to spend it on, this is a bad idea. This will not end well. So again, everything you see in this video will be items I got for free, and I still have hundreds of trade credit left over. So this is just the first of many visits, and this was me holding myself back because I do try to be selective in what I pick up. So I was just looking for anything that jumped out to me that was something I had been looking to pick up or looking to read, or was absurdly cheap to begin with. And again, this giving me hundreds of dollars in trade credits for a McKay's location.
This is a bad idea. I'm already out of space. What have I done? I couldn't help myself. Let's put it that way.
So to start, I'll go through the books, and I was just going around, and as always, there are so many interesting things that pop up there, and sometimes things you've never heard of, and sometimes things are so cheap you decide you're going to pick it up anyway. So I knew that, especially after his retirement from acting, that Gene Hackman had written or co-authored several books, but I just never read one. And so I found the hardcover edition of the book he co-authored, the Civil War novel Escape from Andersonville, with this rather nice looking cover. So I figured, why not? I'll give it a read. It looks interesting enough. But then I happened to open it when I got home, and happened to notice that it's actually autographed. I didn't expect that for sure. So every once in a while you find special editions of books, and sometimes even autographed copies. So that was an incredible bonus. As usual, I always raid their film and cinema section looking for reference books and texts, and every once in a while there's some nice university press books mixed in. But sometimes you find interesting volumes and you just can't say no. So this is a collection entitled The Movies Are, which is a collection of silent film reviews and essays by the legendary Carl Sandburg. And it's in really nice condition. Even has a introduction by Roger Ebert, so I really couldn't say no. And it's also got some nice imagery scattered throughout with nicely laid out text. And it's not often that you find an entire volume of essays about basically doing reviews of the silent era by one of the great American poets. So this was a must. Plus, it has an Ebert introduction, and I'm determined to get all of his writings in print if I can. So that even goes for introductions. This next one is an upgrade copy, and if there's anything Bond related that I can find in a McKay's, it's really great because sometimes you can find fantastic pieces for very little. So this is the first of several Bond related items, but I was able to get an upgrade copy of the Choice of Weapons Omnibus, which is the second of 2 volumes in this super large, thick, oversized paperback design that collects the Raymond Benson James Bond novels. But what's essential about these is they have his short stories in their unedited full form, which were otherwise only published in edited versions in magazines such as Playboy and TV Guide. So they're very tough to track down, and you want to get the collected versions because they are the uncut versions of the short stories. And this and the Union Trilogy volume are still the best ways to get those. But because these are these huge, oversized paperbacks, even if you order them brand new, they're usually already a bit dinged up. And also, the pages yellow very easily. So this is just an upgrade copy for me because it's in really nice shape for one of these. And mine was a bit dinged up. I've always meant to read the classic Mickey Spillane Mike Hammer novels. Just it's one of the series I've just not gotten to yet. So it was a real surprise to find not one, but 2 3-book omnibus volumes. These are part of an omnibus series from about 2001 or so, which nicely puts together 3 of the novels in oversized paperback form. The first volume's unfortunately a little worn. It's got a little bit of page tanning, but it's otherwise in perfect shape. And both of these were about $1.50, and plus they were free on top of that. So they were not only absurdly cheap and in a rather, good reading shape to begin with, but 6 books for $3, which was actually free, then I really can't say no. Another publisher I really enjoy reading is the Hardcase Crime publisher, who specializes in classic pulp and crime novel reprints by big name and lesser known authors, but also doing brand new novels, so publishing new crime and other novels that could be considered pulp fiction. But their releases are nice with uniform matching spines, but they don't often pop up in used bookshops. So I found the release of Low Down Road, which is a new novel, but then also 3 of their reprints of vintage Michael Crichton stories that he actually wrote under a pseudonym of John Lang. So he wrote a number of works long before he was ever famous, and a good number of like these were actually under different pseudonyms. So for a while, he's actually writing essentially crime and pulp thriller novels, which I've always wanted to check out. So I'm just really happy that some of these turned up, and anytime I see the unique, very identifiable Hardcase Crime logo, then my eyes immediately zero in on it because I really, at some point, would like to read all of these. That, of course, was merely only stack 1. Now we have stack 2 of just the paperbacks. This shelf is going to get very full very quickly. I'm going to run out of space in this video alone. It was not a good idea to give me this much trade credits. So I managed to find a couple more of the Star Trek original series novels, which I've been slowly reading through one at a time. It's nice to find them in such nice shape because the covers are so beautifully done that they themselves are rather collectible. But since these books ran so long in terms of the numbers and they existed for such a wide range of years, usually they turn up in very poor condition. So anytime I see a few pop up at McKay's, or well, especially at McKay's because they're usually dirt cheap, if it's one I haven't read, and I knew that was going to happen. If it's one I haven't read, then I definitely give it a shot, especially if it's a quarter or less. But very rarely do they pop up in nice, perfect shape. So again, anytime I can chip away at a few of those, I will. They also have one of the Peter David New Frontier novels, and I do really love Peter David as an author. They also had one of his other series known as Psyman. So again, these were so cheap, and he's one of the authors I really enjoy reading. So I figured might as well try these as well, especially since not only were they, a few cents to begin with, but free on top of that, well, I really can't say no to free books. That's my problem. This next one is not a book I ever really intended on reading, but this was in perfect shape and really more of a morbid curiosity pickup because it was only a quarter to begin with. But this is The Bourne Objective, one of the many sort of sequels to the original Ludlum novels authorized by the estate. Most of these were written by Eric Van Lispeter, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And now there are new authors continuing from this, so there's a ton of Bourne book sequels. It started with The Bourne Legacy, was the first Lispeter novel, which had some interesting moments, but I just didn't really like that book at all. And then I read the next one or two that he did, and it just felt quite alien to the original book. So I usually just ignore the others, but every time I notice one, I suddenly realize there's like another 5 I've never heard of. So I found this copy of The Bourne Objective, and again, it was in perfect shape for only a quarter to begin with, but it was also then free with all the trade credit I had. So I figured I would just give this a go and see what one of the later authorized sequels was like. But again, I would advise people just sticking with the original Bourne trilogy of novels by Robert Ludlum, and then trying some of these other ones that are tagged Bourne if you're at all interested or curious about them. So I've been curious every once in a while, so I figured I might as well try another one. I found a few of the lesser discussed and some of the harder to find of the young reader Star Wars novels, but in particular several written by Ryder Windham, who I think is one of the great Star Wars writers who mostly stuck to the young adult books from Scholastic and others. So this is one of the volumes he did for the Clone Wars animated series. But then harder to find these days are the what started as Star Wars missions, but then turned into adventures for each of the original trilogy, then for the prequels. And this was part of a Scholastic series. It was a role-playing game series that you got the game books and then had a little board and some die. But the actual story sections are actually quite good and usually by really great Star Wars writers like Windham. But these are very tricky to find these days because trying to get a complete set is difficult because there are dozens of them. They were only printed once usually and in very thin paperbacks that are usually really dinged up by now. So anytime I find some of these, I'm just chipping away at yet another book collection that I'm working on. But then also, interestingly, this was actually a series I'd kind of forgotten about. This is the 1998 Young Reader Choose Your Own Adventure version of The Empire Strikes Back. This was a really interesting thing to do with the original trilogy, and you have this nice holofoil cover mimicking the sort of faces cover of the film with the Stormtrooper helmet, but then having a shot from the Battle of Hoth here in this sort of holofoil design, which is admittedly really cool looking. I've seen some of these before, and I think I've read one of them at some point, but it's in the traditional choose your own adventure style with the numbers and then, flip to page such and such to do certain decisions. And nicely, there is a little bit of unique artwork here and there, which is really well done. So you can see some nice black and white illustrations of some moments from the film, but of course from a different angle because this is a sort of alternate universe choose your own adventure adaptation. So hopefully I can find some of the others in this, but I think they basically just did one for each of the original trilogy. Unfortunately, there wasn't anything Hardy Boys related, but I did find one of the Nancy Drews I didn't have, which is Book 29 in the Girl Detective series. And if I can ever find the last couple that I need of this, I'm also trying to build a Nancy Drew library because I didn't have enough Stratemeyer Syndicate classic books, I guess. I'm a lifelong Hardy Boys collector. If you obviously seen my channel, you've seen all my Hardy Boys videos, but slowly but surely I'm trying to get the various Nancy Drew volumes as well, and going to McKay's is a great place to be able to chip away at various children's book series if you collect them, because usually they pop up for very cheap, but the condition can vary wildly, and even books from this era around 2005 to 2010 are getting scarcer on the used market. Speaking of scarcer, I found an upgrade copy of a very difficult difficult to obtain series that I've almost finished getting all the volumes, and that is the Crime Busters series, which was the spinoff of the iconic Three Investigators. This was done in the style of the Hardy Boys case files, and the Nancy Drew files even has the smaller paperback design. This was started in the late 80s and designed as a means to update the classic series for
Older, more mature teenage readers.
and make the stories darker. And so these are actually quite good for what they are, but it was unfortunately very short lived. And these are exceptionally difficult to get a hold of, as most only went through one printing. This is book 8, some really nice shape, but it has some stickers I'm going to have to try to get off. But it's very rare to find any Three Investigators in the wild these days, especially one of the Crime Busters. But you certainly don't see them in this shape. They're usually beat to crap if you find one. And then the absolute find of the paperbacks, the McKay's Black Hole Strikes Again, because usually when James Bond editions pop up, it's usually the standard paperbacks in terms of the US paperbacks, and they're usually pretty beat up, pretty worn. Every once in a while you might find one of the trade paperbacks or an older volume, but every once in a while you find a UK copy. And lo and behold, I see sticking out of the small action and adventure section the first edition paperback UK pan of Colonel Sun, with the unique artwork that's beyond striking of Bond reflected in the Colonel's glasses. This is in exceptionally fine shape with just a little bit of spine wear. I never see pan copies in the wild. I've found one or two, and those are the one or two pans that I have in my own collection, but this is definitely one of the best condition ones I've ever seen. There's just a little bit of page tanning, which you're usually going to see on these, but otherwise it's in fantastic shape. And it was only priced at $1.95 to begin with, which was absolutely stunning. But this just had my name all over it, so this was another absolute shock to find just sitting on the shelf. Now to move on to the stack of DVDs I got. This first one is also Bond related. It's the original Sony release of the first season of the Heart to Heart series, which Tom Mankiewicz worked on as a writer and director, so I've always wanted to pick up at least some of these. Sony did the DVDs at first, didn't do the complete series, but their releases are fancier with multiple discs and hard cases and a nice slip box. Eventually the whole series was done, I believe, by Shout Factory, but usually that means it's going to be the same masters but not as well encoded and such. So if you can, it's always best to get the original studio release, which also has fancier packaging. So I just picked this up because it was dirt cheap and in perfect shape, and it was the original Sony release. And I know Tom Mankiewicz worked on this series for a while. I don't know if he was on it the whole time, but I know he's at least here during the first season. So this is just something I've always meant to pick up for my Bond adjacent shelf. Rather amazingly, they had the original Volume 1 release of the classic Defenders of the Earth cartoon, with all the iconic King Features characters, but especially for me, being a giant fan, a lifelong fan of the Phantom, I've always wanted to get the various animated series on the only official releases. Sadly, there's no official release outside of the feature film cut of different episodes of the classic 2040 cartoon. But Defenders of the Earth was a bit earlier in the 1980s, brought all the characters together. Of course, the Phantom with Mandrake the Magician and Flash Gordon and others. But the DVDs went out of print very quickly. There were 2 volumes, and Volume 2 is even rarer than this volume. There was a complete DVD release, but it was from, I believe, I want to say it was Mill Creek. It was a budget release, but even that is absurdly expensive. The episodes have now been uploaded on YouTube, but it's obviously going to be much lower quality than the DVD release, which also has supplements and nice packaging. So I was really surprised to find this just floating around, because the discs were in perfectly fine shape. All of the cases are here, and there's even some nice printed extras in this nice little custom folder. So inside the fancy custom holder, we have a full booklet about the series, in terms of also being a complete episode guide for this section. Then advertising the equally rare to get Flash Gordon series release, which I was finally able to find. But then there's also some really nice art cards of the main characters with information about the artists on the back. And then a nice little fold-out guide to Funimation releases on DVD at this time. The slip box is also actually laminated, so that's a really nice touch as well, especially how it sort of makes the various characters pop off of the edges. So this was a real surprise find, as this is very uncommon, long out of print, and this is the fancier original multi-disc version with the printed supplements as well. Again, Volume 2 is much rarer and much more expensive, but still, Volume 1 is not common, so maybe I can find Volume 2 somewhere again at a sensational price, but at least I was able to get half the series. Then, very surprisingly, they had a copy of the not very common Fox DVD set entitled the Tyrone Power Matinee Idol Collection. This was done to go along with the Tyrone Power Swashbuckler Collection. This is actually a much more expansive box set because it brings together 10 films and is much less common and was much more expensive. Each is in a nice, efficient DVD slim case packing 2 films together. And this is part of the Fox Cinema Classics line, where they were doing much spiffier DVD releases, sometimes with supplemental features and sometimes with new transfers as well. So this is one of the nicer designed releases of this line, and nicely fitting 10 films plus supplements into a nice slimmer box that fits nicely on the shelf and also has a nice gloss finish on here. So this was really surprising to find for dirt cheap, but especially when I had all this trade credit. And I don't think any of these films are going to be seeing a reissue anytime soon because they're part of the Fox library, of course, but they're getting into some of the lesser known power vehicles that were not in the Swashbuckler Adventure mold. So this goes hand in hand with the Swashbuckler set I've had for years, and I've just always meant to get this, and it's just usually quite pricey and doesn't pop up very often. So this was an absolute must. Now we come to the one impulse buy of this whole thing. This is definitely the one thing I didn't necessarily need, but it was in such perfect shape, and I always said to myself, if I ever found this for cheap, I might pick it up simply because of the artwork. So I found, sticking out of the bargain bin, the 2-disc special edition DVD release of the Blade Runner Final Cut with the alternative amazing Drew Struzan artwork on the sort of hollow foil finish slipcover, which looks absolutely fantastic. And as you can see, this is in absolutely mint condition, as if it was 2007 all over again, and I just picked this up at like a Walmart. It is also reflective on the back, so it looks fantastic. And if that wasn't enough, the DVD itself was actually still sealed, and as you can see, it was only 95 cents to begin with, so go figure. But this being a Warner release, and the being from the effective year run, and it being a Blade Runner release, which some of them can be affected by this, it's quite likely that the discs inside here suffer from the unfortunate Warner DVD rot. Maybe not, but it's entirely possible. But I just picked this up because of the cover and the slip cover. So, again, it was only 95 cents to begin with and absolutely mint condition. So, this is the one thing I splurged on. I couldn't help myself, and I already have multiple variations of Blade Runner for different transfer reasons and supplements and audio tracks and things, but this is the one I picked up because it's the other Drew Struzan poster, and the slipcover was perfect, and it was already less than $1, and then it was free, so I splurged. These next two are particular DVDs I've wanted to pick up, but they're not quite common, and that's part of Sony's Robin Hood collection that they did around the time of the 2010 Ridley Scott film. This is basically making a newer master, or sometimes a new master, of all various Robin Hood properties that they had in the library, and doing this sort of uniform, actually quite nice looking design. There are several of these, but only Hammer's Sword of Sherwood Forest has gotten a full upgrade to the lovely Indicator Blu-ray. These others were eventually released in a budget Mill Creek collection, but that means they took these nice Sony DVDs and shoved multiple films onto the same disc, so it's going to be the same masters but with much worse compression. So I've had my eye out to try and find these others. There's about 4 or 5 of these overall, and I do have one of them plus Sword of Sherwood Forest on the Indicator Blu-ray, so it's just one more that I have to pick up in this particular branding, and then there's a Sony MOD DVD as well, so I've just got 2 more to find, but I was happy to at least find 2 more of these because they're not super expensive, but they are the nicest presentations of these, and they're not super common. And I do try to get the original studio releases with much better compression and encoding versus getting the budget Mill Creek version. This next one is an Uncommon Roan Group release, which immediately gets my video nerd radar set off. But this is actually a double feature of classic Bulldog Drummond films, and these have had a variety of public domain releases. So as far as I know, this is the only official release of these 2 films. So this is a Roan Group title, handled by Image, and even has the Yanis logo on the back. This doesn't really have anything in terms of special features that I knew of, but these should be the best transfers. And interestingly, they have liner notes for each film by the great Bruce Eder, one of the great film historians who contributed to a lot of Roan Group and vintage Criterion Collection releases. So that was another bonus. I'm trying to see all of the Bulldog Drummond films, but there's so many over a big span of time, and most like these have nothing but terrible, crappy public domain releases or no releases at all. So again, this is the only sort of official release I know for either of these 2 films, so this was a no-brainer. Plus, it's in a snapper case that has a nice laminated gloss finish on here. Then for the director's shelf, they had a sealed copy of the Otto Preminger The Cardinal on the Warner DVD. Again, less than $1, still sealed. So this is just one of the Preminger films I'd been meaning to see for a long while. Another Roan Group release, this is the Edgar G. Ulmer picture Strange Illusion from 1945, which has seen nothing but endless crappy public domain releases because it was done for PRC. So the Roan Group release, I believe, is the best available version, so I was happy to find this. I try to chip away at any Roan titles like this if I find them because they're not super common. They had the Warner Archive release of Congo, which is actually the sound remake of the iconic West of Zanzibar, but with Walter Houston in the main role instead of Lon Chaney Sr. I've seen images from this, but I've never got to see the whole thing, so I was really happy to pick this up. But it also is one of these quiet double features, because as you can see here, it also includes Untamed Africa. So this has not 1, but 2 features on the same Warner Archive MOD disc. But I've just been very curious about this because I knew there was the Walter Houston remake of West of Zanzibar, but I just never gotten around to seeing it all the way through, and now I can. They had the 1947 John Wayne vehicle Tycoon with a fantastic cast, in perfect shape for literally a quarter, so it was already something I would have picked up. But again, it was only a quarter, and then that, of course, was free, so of course it's a classic on a Warner DVD for free. I'm going to get it. Then here is a Image Snapper Case DVD release of 1949's The Big Wheel, which was part of the Wade Williams collection. So that means this is a title that he had bought up the rights to and was otherwise unavailable. And this is the only major release of the film that I'm really aware of. So this is not a film I've seen, but I figured it being a racing theme film, and with the cast and it being a Mickey Rooney vehicle and it being such an obscure, hard to see film to begin with, I figured, well, it's on a cheap DVD I'll never find again for this price, plus it's free. So sometimes rarity wins out when it's a title you've never seen before if the price is right. Then to move on to Blu-ray, they had a number of DC animated titles, some of the DC animated straight-to-video adaptation films, but also some of the vintage series and some of the newer series, and certain Blu-ray titles that just don't pop up, and they were all so absurdly cheap that I just got all of them. The first is one I've been meaning to get, which is the New Adventures of Batman release from Warner. Of course, have the DVD, and this is one of their newer HD remasters, but of course crams the series onto 2 discs, so that means that unfortunately this is going to have some of the dreaded drawbacks of how Warner handles DC animated titles in terms of compression and other things. But this is just something I've been meaning to pick up, and it was even cheaper than the online sale price. So that was a bonus. Next, they had some of the Teen Titans Go series. I know this is not as popular with a lot of people now because people really prefer the 2003 more serious, straightforward cartoon, which is understandable. But I think there's a place for some of the goofy humor and more, for lack of a better term, kiddie stuff in the Go version. I just wish that every once in a while they might get back to doing some of the serious stuff. But I did pick up the crossover Teen Titans Go versus Teen Titans, which basically is trying to address that whole debate. But also they had the season release of the first season of the show, and this is the only collection of the actual episodes, or really they're more episode shorts that they've done, and this is already a more expensive, harder to get Blu-ray that you don't see in stores really. So I just went ahead and picked up both of them because I'd like to have a DC animated Blu-ray library at some point. I've just been inching my way to picking up all the titles one at a time. Speaking of the direct-to-video animated films, they had a handful that I hadn't gotten. I've seen a mixture of these, but anytime I see any of the Blu-ray releases in good shape for cheap, I pick those up. So they had the Wonder Woman film, but also several with the slipcases. So the Son of Batman adaptation, then the Justice League Gods and Monsters adaptation, and also Superman versus the Elite. So anytime I find these for cheap with the lovely slipcovers as well, then I really can't say no. To move on to other Blu-rays and some boutique label releases, they had the Arrow reissue of The Grand Duel, which is the fancier, more extras-laden edition of the film, and really the version you want to get compared to the old Mill Creek Blu-ray, with nice reversible artwork as well. This is the best version of the film to date and was cheaper than even the sale price. And I never see Arrow discs pop up at McKay's outside of some of their more mainstream releases. So this was a really nice surprise. Continuing with Westerns, they had the Kino release of Macho Callahan, which is a more obscure Kino title. It's also got not only a commentary, but it was also from a brand new 4K scan and restoration. So I'm curious to check this out. This is a Western I've never gotten to see, and anytime I find a more obscure Kino title in the wild that's also from a new 4K master, then I'm even more interested. Next is the Fox release of the Kazan picture Panic in the Streets, which is a fantastic blend of suspense thriller and crime noir, and it being a Fox title means it's one of the titles you want to get before it's completely gone. And I've seen this sort of fluctuate on the used market in terms of price ever since the Fox library went on forced moratorium after the Disney buyout. So this is just one of the Fox Blu-rays that I knew was solid and had just been meaning to pick up if I found an affordable copy. Next are some Warner Archive discs. The William Wellman directed Blood Alley, which is a John Wayne and Lauren Bacall vehicle with the beautiful original artwork. This is one of the earlier Archive Blu-rays I've just been meaning to pick up. They do so many great titles that unfortunately you start to lose track and have to remind yourself of all the ones you haven't been able to pick up yet, or your wallet hasn't allowed you to. So anytime I can chip away at some, even at a McKay's location, that's helpful. And thankfully they had one or two mixed in. Another one I've been meaning to pick up is the classic Dark of the Sun, which is a fantastic, beyond zestful action picture directed by Jack Cardiff of all people. But this is a phenomenal action picture with some really brutal moments throughout. And this is the lovely Archive newer transfer master, and definitely one of the Archive Blu-rays I've been meaning to pick up for way too long. Then in the absolute surprises of the Blu-ray section, I never see Severin titles in the wild. It's not usually a label I'm all that interested in terms of what their focus is, but I've been wanting to pick up some of their Christopher Lee and now Peter Cushing box sets for select titles in particular, especially the two Sherlock Holmes related titles. Those box sets are usually pretty expensive and they can sell out, but I've had them on my wish list. But they have started actually selling some of the releases separately, but most of those aren't out yet. So I didn't expect to find the release from the first Lee set, which is Sherlock Holmes and the Deadly Necklace, which was directed by Terence Fisher, the Legend of Hammer films, in this lovely edition, which is definitely the spiffiest version of the film that's ever existed, with supplements. But then also, what I'm a giant fan of is the BBC television adaptation of Sherlock Holmes starring Peter Cushing, which only has certain episodes survive. This is part of the new Cushing box set, Cushing Curiosities, but this is presenting the episodes in as best quality as possible, improving over the old DVD set that I have, but with new supplements as well. So these were two titles that I wanted to pick up in the box sets, but I didn't expect them to pop up still sealed for dirt cheap at only, $12.95 each. And these were both free. So while I would still like to get the box sets eventually, I was able to at least cherry pick the two titles I wanted most for dirt cheap, which was then free with all the trade credit I had. And then last but not least, I did pick up a nice little stack of trade paperbacks and other comics, because I like to dabble in comic books because I don't have enough interests apparently. But every once in a while something catches my eye. I've been meaning to try and read all of the various pulp character and pulp hero related comics that Dynamite has done. I've read most of their Shadow and some of their Green Hornet stories, for example, and then some of the team-ups and crossovers, but they also had a separate series called Project Superpowers that had some spin-offs. So I picked up the trade paperbacks for Death Defying Devil, and then for the Black Terror as well. And speaking of crossovers, I finally grabbed the team up of the Batman 66 series with the Green Hornet, and I'm also trying to work my way through all of the Green Hornet adaptations. So I've read this series before and really enjoyed it. I do like the Batman 66 comic series very much, but I've just never gotten any of them in physical form, so I picked up the team up volume. Also, nicely, they had Dynamite's first volume of their Lone Ranger comic, which I've really been wanting to read since I've been devouring the classic radio series episodes. So this was one I had on my wish list and was really wanting to read. So it was great that they had the volume 1 trade paperback. Then in the bargain section, they had some smaller DC trade paperbacks and giant annuals and things. So I found a nice Birds of Prey volume, plus this interesting looking Superman volume as authored by Clark Kent, some various DC giants, but in particular the Primal Age volume looked really interesting, and for a few cents I certainly couldn't say no. So there you have it. This is what happens when you give me trade credit at a McKay's bookstore and you let me loose for just a short amount of time. This was me applying restraint. I still have hundreds in trade credit left over, so this is just the first of at least several trips. Although if I could spend the whole day there, I could probably blow through the entire amount of trade credit without even trying very quickly. And it does seem like a lot of people who went and got the same or even more trade credit ran through there and had already sort of picked over the store. So this is after the store has had a lot of traffic for like the past week or two. So I got all of this for free. It's crazy. But yeah, this is what happens when you give me trade credit there. That's a bad idea. So I thought it'd be fun to put this in video form because it's such a unique experience and was such an interesting, fun, but also kind of crazy promotion. I don't think they're going to repeat it, but basically people could get $800 or more in trade credit, and there were a lot of people. So, but it's also, each store is giant and you never know what's going to pop up there. So it's really a sort of one of a kind physical media experience, regardless of if you're going there for books or music or movies or whatever you're looking for, because they kind of have some of everything. But again, this was me with just some trade credit in like an hour or two. I've got a lot more damage to do. In terms of I have so much trade credit that's burning a hole in my pocket. So I just thought it'd be fun to do in video form. So as always, I hope my babblings about films and books and comics and music and anything in between, all forms of physical media, has been at least somewhat fun and informative. If you've never been to a McKay's and you're anywhere around one, I would suggest stopping there and just kind of being overwhelmed at the sheer amount of physical media that you're going to be surrounded by and some astonishing bargains. But also definitely do go and support your local independent bookstores wherever possible, because they need all your help and support. And as always, keep your disc spinning, keep reading print books. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching.